Diamond in the Rough frames Rust Valley Restorers as an exploration of human behavior under the guise of mechanical restoration, and what emerges from this framing is a series that functions as a slow-burn character study rather than a procedural show, beginning with its portrayal of Rust Valley itself as an environment shaped by accumulation rather than design. A place where intention has historically followed opportunity instead of the other way around, and this environment provides the psychological context for Mike Hall's worldview, which values potential over completion and narrative over outcome, and the show's early scenes establish this worldview through Mike's language, his tendency to anthropomorphize cars, to speak of them as waiting rather than abandoned, and this rhetorical choice is significant because it absolves inaction by framing it as patience. And Diamond in the Rough systematically tests this framing by introducing moments where waiting becomes indistinguishable from neglect, and Avery Show's presence is essential to this test, not as a moral authority but as a structural one, representing the reality that systems collapse when growth outpaces management. And what I find most compelling as a critic is how the show allows Avery to be wrong in tone but right in principle, occasionally dismissive of emotional value yet consistently accurate in his assessments of risk, and this complexity prevents the series from slipping into didacticism, instead presenting conflict as a negotiation rather than a verdict, and the introduction of Connor Hall adds a generational dimension to this negotiation, highlighting how inherited passion must be adapted rather than replicated. And some of the most resonant scenes in Diamond in the Rough involve Connor advocating for discipline not because he lacks love for the cause but because he understands that love without limits leads to collapse, and this understanding positions him as both successor and reformer, a dual role that generates subtle tension with Mike, especially in moments where authority must shift, and the show captures this tension with remarkable sensitivity, using silence, eye contact, and shared labor to communicate what dialogue might oversimplify, and as the series progresses, the act of restoration itself becomes increasingly symbolic, particularly in scenes where work must be undone to correct earlier mistakes, and these reversals function as narrative metaphors for self-examination, acknowledging that sincere effort does not guarantee correctness, and that progress sometimes requires admitting that previous decisions, however well-intentioned, were flawed, and this theme resonates deeply with anyone who has attempted long-term creative or entrepreneurial projects, where sunk cost fallacy often masquerades as loyalty. And Diamond in the Rough confronts this fallacy directly, especially in scenes involving the decision to sell completed restorations, framing these sales not as betrayals but as validations of purpose, and Mike's evolving response to these moments is one of the series' quiet triumphs, revealing a man learning that letting go can be an act of respect rather than loss, and the show's visual storytelling reinforces this evolution through changes in composition, with earlier wide shots emphasizing chaos and later sequences favoring focus frames that mirror the tightening of priorities, and this formal consistency enhances the thematic cohesion of the series, making Rust Valley Restorers feel less episodic and more novelistic in structure, and as someone who approaches film and television through narrative analysis, I'm struck by how effectively the show uses repetition as development, returning to similar situations with altered responses to demonstrate growth, such as Mike resisting the impulse to acquire another car or Avery allowing space for emotional considerations within planning discussions, and these shifts are incremental but meaningful, and they accumulate into a portrait of transformation grounded in practice rather than proclamation, and Diamond in the Rough ultimately positions restoration as an ethical act, one that requires honesty about limits, respect for process, and courage to release outcomes, and this ethical framing elevates the series beyond its genre, offering viewers a meditation on how value is created, preserved, and sometimes relinquished, and when the show concludes its arc, it leaves us not with the image of a perfect car but with a system capable of producing one responsibly, and this distinction is crucial, because it suggests that true restoration is not about isolated success but about building conditions where success can occur repeatedly without self-destruction, and as a critic and viewer, I find this message both sobering and hopeful, reminding us that diamonds are not defined by their rarity alone but by the discipline required to uncover and refine them. And that the roughness we encounter along the way is not an obstacle to meaning but its necessary context.